up, world? Welcome back to Talent Roadmap, a podcast where we interview folks on their career journeys, get insight, advice, tips that are within the career path and also adjacent learnings as well. So today I have none other than Mike Lee. Mike and I worked together at Crunchyroll for a few years. And since then, we've kind of done our own things, but ended up both in the podcast world. So without further ado, I'll let Mike share his story because there's a lot of things that I didn't know about him prior to Crunchyroll, and there are things that he's got going on that would be super useful to you folks listening. So I'll pass it to you, Mike. Give us a quick intro. Let us know, a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Henry, for the wonderful introduction. My name is Mike. I've been in marketing for primarily mobile games for probably almost 14, 15 years or so. I recently actually left my job back in mid-December of 2024. Just decided to take a career break. Main thing is just like I wanted to figure out at this point in time in my life if this is something that I really want to do, right, or continue doing, or if there's
Yeah.
other opportunities that I want to explore, but also just take some time for myself to work on, other things outside of just the things I had been working on. I think it's really important to just take that break every once in a while and just to
Yeah.
reassess. Sometimes you can be stuck in the grind, and having that break is really important.
Dude, very cool, man. Before we get into the break and the future, Mike, let's like rewind to early career because I noticed you worked at Sega and a lot of different companies prior to even YouTube, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
How did your career kick off? What did you study in college? And then maybe the first few decisions you made to kind of get you on path to your career. So like, where did it all start?
Sure. So I graduated in 2010 from University of California, Irvine,
Hmm.
double major in economics and Japanese. And I knew, like, when I was in college, that I wanted to learn more about money and how kind of like
Okay.
finances and all that stuff work. Not only personal finances, but just like overall, like how does money work within a societal context.
Hmm.
And then two, I was always really passionate about Japanese language and literature. So that's something that I decided to kind of double major in my last year. So I stacked a bunch of courses to try
Wow.
to graduate on time. Did a lot of summer school courses as well. And then when I graduated, I kind of had to make a choice, right? Like I was looking, at different kinds of marketing jobs. And I was like, okay, I'm going to look at jobs in Irvine. And this is before like LinkedIn was really kind of taking off. So Craigslist was obviously, or like Craigslist, Indeed, right? Monster.com, right? Those were probably like the bigger sites where people actually posted jobs. And so I was looking at the jobs in Irvine, how much they paid, what kind of jobs typically were there for new college grads. A lot of it was insurance, real estate, not really stuff that I was really interested in. And then
Hmm.
I'm originally from the Bay Area, so I was deciding like, okay, should I move back home in San Francisco and live with my parents for a little bit? But at the same time, I was also looking at jobs on Craigslist in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I would look at all the marketing jobs and it'd be like $20 an hour, $30 an hour versus like the $8 to $10 an hour that was back in Southern California.
Wow.
So it was kind of like, okay, let me make this decision. I could either not pay rent, living at home, right? But I get double, the salary, right? Or I can pay rent but get less salary potentially, but stay
Hmm.
closer to all my college friends and things like that. So in that sense, it was kind of one of my first major kind of like post college life decisions of like, I want to make this jump. I want to be frugal. I want to have a good financial
Nice.
mindset in making this decision. So I had to decided to move back home, work a couple, job like internships for free, probably for the first year or so.
Hmm.
Some of it was like interning at a real estate agent company, doing marketing for them. Working at YouTube, that was like customer support. So it was just kind of like marketing wasn't necessarily the first job that I really had right out of college, in the way that I've had experience with product marketing for mobile games now. But yeah, eventually, like after YouTube, got into Disney, kind of like a mix of marketing plus customer. support. Was kind of in a position there where I wanted to go to marketing, but this is where I kind of learned about big corporate like kind of politics, especially working at a company like Disney, especially someone for as young in my career. Like I had no idea like what does it mean when a marketing department says, "Oh, we don't have headcount, like we can't move you under, here," right? Like, "Oh,
Mm.
you're stuck in this division and they have their own incentives," right? And you might not necessarily be prioritized because, I was dotted line to a marketing person, but I technically reported to a studio head.
Wow.
So those are different things that I kind of learned about like how complicated it is, or just like it's not as black and white as it seems in terms of like how you position yourself. Like, are you, and some things are out of your control too, right? Like you can't necessarily control like, oh, I initially joined this org, but I got moved to this org, and I'm reporting
Hmm.
dotted line to this person. So yeah, that was kind of an experience in itself. And
Hmm.
then kind of going into the mobile phase or like more of like the actual product marketing stuff. When I joined NetMarble, that was kind of the first time that I got a little bit more of a structured product marketing experience, at least from a B2C consumer point of view. Worked there for about a year and then kind of moved on to Sega and Glue, etc. And each of those experiences were like, okay, each company has more resources that I can really learn what does it mean to be a product marketer with obviously more money, more budget, but also like a user research team, a UA team that spends more money, right? Like things like that that kind of helped, I think, gave me a better picture of like what does it actually mean to be uh, a fully kind of more rounded like product marketer. After Glue, went to Crunchyroll. Part of that decision was like actually, ironically enough, that's where we ended up meeting. But my decision going into it was like I really wanted to do something around Asia, right? Like it was just a
Hmm.
phase in my life where, I originally wanted to get into games because like I wanted to leverage my skills from my Japanese major. And so I knew that going to Crunchyroll in 2018, I was like, okay, my mindset is this is a media company. I'm coming from a games company. I kind of saw it like I'm like going to a nonprofit almost. Like
Right.
I knew I was going to take
Okay.
a pay cut, right? Like the recruiter at that time, I think it was your boss, who was like, "You sure you want to do this? I know it's a pay cut." It's like, no, like this is something that like I would like to cross off a bucket list. And for
Hmm.
me, it wasn't necessarily like I'm doing it for the money, right? I'm doing it for my own joy and personal fulfillment, and I did, and I really enjoyed my time working at Crunchyroll. Um, and yeah, I decided to leave Crunchyroll to go to Jam City, just because like I really wanted to get an experience working with someone who has had experience at an ad agency. Like I felt like that was kind
Hmm.
of like the last thing that was really missing in my career as a marketer. And so I found that at Jam City, and I was blessed to really work with like, in my opinion, one of the best creative services teams that I've ever worked with, and that's
Wow.
something where uh, I had a lot of joy working at Jam City. And then I decided to take a break. After that, I see a lot of my friends getting married, having kids, maybe some people who are kind of stuck in their careers, but they got to support families and stuff like that. They're the sole provider. Maybe they got mortgages and stuff like that. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if I want to be stuck in that situation. I got maybe,
Hmm.
one more swing, at least as of now, to try to do something that's different, right? Potentially,
Hmm.
before I have to really like uh, take a little bit less risk, right? When, other dependents are on the line. So I want to stop there because I know I've spoken
Yeah.
a lot, but yeah, just let me know your thoughts.
No, yeah, super cool, man. Oh God, I have so many questions. I'm gonna put a pin in one, the YouTube internship and the other one. What was the first other internship you had?
Oh, it was a real estate marketing
Real estate.
internship.
Okay.
Yeah, and the
Because
the
that,
YouTube one that was actually not an internship. That was like just a contract job.
okay, cool. We'll hold on to those real quick. But you mentioned studying economics, which I think was very helpful, or still very helpful for you in making the decision to take a pay cut from Glue Mobile to Crunchyroll. I'm assuming that you have built something up until that point where maybe finances weren't an issue, maybe a bad assumption, but I'm kind of curious as to what led to you being so comfy outside of it being a bucket list job, because not many folks can say, "Hey, I can take a pay cut to pursue, this bucket list opportunity." And then I have another question about your whole roadmap, but I wanted to talk about that real quick if you can share.
Yeah, so I think the reason why I kind of felt a little bit more comfy was well, at that time I was like living at home for a hot second, so probably for at least a
Hmm.
year or so, and then
Okay.
moved out again. So just obviously having, I'm grateful for my family to allow me to just kind of like take that reset in terms of like not having to pay rent or mortgage, etc.
Hmm.
At that period of time was something that was really comfy. But also it was kind of like saving money has always been a really important part of kind of how I thought about self-reliancy, self-sufficiency. I've generally been a frugal person. Want to also say that I've also done, investing in the stock market and stuff like that as well. So just like having those different layers really helped gave me a little bit cushion to take the pay cut. I think the pay cut that I took was probably like a 20-30% pay
Hmm.
cut, but in the
Hmm.
grand scheme of things, like I already saved enough. Like I already was living below my means. So I think that's really
Hmm.
important when you want to take either a pay cut or a change in your career. It just gives you opportunities to find things that, potentially could bring you joy in your work. So that was
Right.
the most important thing for me.
Got it. Yeah, I just found it really interesting that your economics major and your interest in finances in general kind of helped you make better decisions down the road. So we'll talk about that more at a later episode. And I wanted to actually touch on your thought process around road mapping your entire career. I realized in this conversation early on, you were looking at roles in Southern California. You were doing research on what type of roles were out there, the pay, the type of industries, and realize you were doing like a cost benefit analysis, if that's the right term,
Yeah.
living in SF or SoCal and seeing which next step could possibly lead to future steps. So you landed on Jam City and said it was another bucket list job. You wanted to work in an ad agency. How did you map this all out? And was it a big plan from the very beginning? Did you iterate as you went or as you went on? I thought that was super cool as well. Documentation and planning ahead is super interesting to me. So yeah,
Yeah.
anything
I
there?
wouldn't say it's like totally 100% like thought out as in like, oh, I knew I wanted to work at someone who worked at an ad agency, like 10 years prior. I would say it's like just to observe where like how things are connected from a marketing sense,
Hmm.
like where people work, right? What are the types of people that I work with, right? Like what are the things that I'm missing from my skill set, right? So I think over time I've built an awareness of
Right.
what I have and what I'm lacking. Um, and then as you get older and you progress in your career, it's like, what are the things that I actually want to fill out? Like, what are
Hmm.
the kinds of experiences that I want to enjoy? And so, kind of going back to touching upon like finances are obviously really important to allow you to take those leaps in terms of the types of experiences you want, because not every experience pays like top dollar, right? Like some of it you have to
Hmm.
do for yourself, right? Like if I didn't join Crunchyroll, maybe I'd still be really itching, to work at a Asian oriented company, right? Like
Hmm.
the desire may not been have been there, right? Like in terms of like if I didn't work on it back then, I wouldn't have yeah, if I didn't work out back then, I might be still itching for it now.
Right.
Um but yeah, that's kind of the general take is like as I'm in each role, like I'm thinking like
Hmm.
what am I missing? What are the other things that I would like to try and like what's the gap that I have right now in terms of
Yeah.
realistically whether I can achieve that or not.
Dude, that's so cool, man. And Japanese. So I had another question that just slipped my mind, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the Japanese studies you did in college. Did that help with Crunchyroll's interviewing process? You don't have to dive deep into the process itself, but having that second language, was that useful for this whole, I guess, experience?
Yeah, I'd say having worked at NetMarble and Sega, as well, like I think prior of going before Crunchyroll, I would say having that
Hmm.
Japanese major was really helpful actually in those actually in all three. Because working
Yeah.
at Asian-based companies, right, like there's certain expectations. The company culture is very different. Even with when they have like an American branch, there's uh there's just a certain kind of rhythm and cadence that's a little bit more difficult to describe. It's a little bit more
Yeah.
top down. Generally speaking, it ranges depending on the type of company, but it really helped in terms of like I kind of knew what to expect, right? I knew that, say, for example, oh, if you're gonna have start having meetings at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, right? Like it's pretty normal, right? Like, and
Hmm.
some people that weren't used to it, like if you're not used to working in that kind of industry or having meetings, that late at night. Some people, especially they haven't worked in Asian-oriented companies or international companies, like, why do we need to have this meeting? What about my work-life
Hmm.
balance, right? Like,
Right.
you kind of have to like, it's an understood thing that you kind of have to take it as part of the role.
Very cool, man. So jumping back to the real estate internship, I would have never guessed that was your first internship or your internship that you kind of fell into. What made you decide to go into real estate as an intern and not necessarily anything in econ or Japanese studies?
I mean, I think it was like the first thing that was available to me, and
Okay.
for for better or for worse, it was a I worked for free. I know technically you're not
Hmm.
really supposed to do that, but like when you're young and you need experience, right? Like employers don't really care like whether you work for
Yeah.
free or you got paid somewhere else. So it was a free internship. It was great. It was basically the role was basically creating content for a real estate
Hmm.
agency. Hard
Okay.
for me actually to remember what I actually did because it's been so long ago.
Hmm.
But I was lucky enough to have someone kind of like show me the ropes of like what real estate actually entails. So I'd say actually less
Hmm.
I learned less on the marketing side, but more about like what makes real estate appealing, right? Like what
Hmm.
are users think or like I shouldn't say users, customers or clients like thinking about when they're making a purchase, like things like that.
Okay. So user experience almost. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, helping
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
with like any events that they were trying to throw together, things like that.
Gotcha. Well, let's get into product marketing because
Okay.
this is actually a term, a role, a profession that I had no clue existed until I got to Crunchyroll. For folks that are listening, how do you describe product marketing? What are the teams does a product marketer work with, and how does it add to like a company's growth? So maybe I'll just leave those three there.
Yeah, I want to just differentiate first, right? Like for product marketing, I feel like we've kind of fallen into two buckets. There's like the business to consumer product marketer, and there's like the B2B product marketer. So probably in tech, most people are probably most familiar with the B2B product marketer. So someone who's putting together, white papers, determining content for sales. That range is like not really in my like wheelhouse. And obviously for product marketers, they work pretty closely with product to kind of highlight like what are the main features, whether it's a launch of a new product, right? Or if it's like any sort of marketing activation, like who is it targeting? Is it a new user? Is
Hmm.
it a existing client or existing user? Are we trying to get lapsed users, etc.? So product marketers are really important for not only for the positioning, messaging, and I would say getting everyone aligned on like the marketing team and product team in terms of like what the go-to-market plan or strategy is. So I
Hmm.
know that just sounds like a bunch of words,
Yeah.
but think of it like the quarterback of a marketing team, right? Like they're saying like,
Hmm.
okay, PR, right? Like your role is generally XYZ, right? Like here's our higher level goals, here's our overall positioning. Um, and, maybe for PR, it's like, oh, we want to make sure that we expand our reach of XYZ oriented initiative. And from there, it's like they have to figure out like how do we position it? What are the pros and cons of messaging it this way? Like they're kind of taking
Hmm.
in all the requirements from different teams, whether it's PR, user research, marketing, user acquisition, et cetera, sales, right? And they're
Wow.
kind of adjusting the strategy based on what works, what doesn't, what do we want to highlight, what don't we want to highlight or de-emphasize. But
Hmm.
they're providing kind of the general plan and strategy that all those other teams are going to take, or ideally should take, and kind of run with it, so that way when a marketing campaign goes out, it all has kind of the same look and feel, the same kind of messaging, It's on brand or on strategy. The messaging is generally pretty similar, but adapted for each of those different kinds of marketing channels or functions. And for those functions, they're taking the content, the positioning, etc., and the messaging and using it in a way that benefits, not only the organization, but also their departments and role as well. So it's so kind of probably similar to like product management, where it's like you don't really manage other teams per se, like directly, but you have to manage through influencing. I would say that's probably one of the key things about product marketing, both on like the B2B side, but also the B2C side in terms of um, making sure that you can get stakeholders on board. And I would honestly say inspire other stakeholders to really do their best work while having a cohesive plan.
I never knew it was that complex and comprehensive and layered. So it sounds like you mentioned it's almost like a product manager, but I think you do still work with PMs, right? Like growth PMs that are building different features, and you're working with design, working with creative, working with sales, you're working with marketing teams, and you're probably working with the executive teams as well at this point. Um, because I think so the way I think about product marketing, this is very like just surface level things that I've read, but you're essentially taking a product and ensuring that it somehow creates some sort of emotion for the user to either go through a funnel or I guess yes, go through a funnel and acquire that product or service. Is that accurate?
I'd say that's part of it. I think the
Okay.
positioning angle is also really important. Let's say like you're launching a new feature, it's like how do you want it to ideally be perceived, right? Like what things are you trying to emphasize? Maybe
Hmm.
some of the environmental factors that if we announce we're gonna push this product, right, or this feature, but maybe for this segment, right, of users, like it's not gonna be that great. So we need to put together, say, a blog post of stuff that says like, hey, like we're going to emphasize XYZ features for this channel. And maybe for PR, it's going to be like a more holistic kind of take, right? Or you're going to highlight
Hmm.
certain key things that are going to bring the most impact relative to the verticals and the channels that you're on.
Okay. And at Crunchyroll, there was a ton of different channels, and I guess separately, but not really. Yeah, I think you need. I guess let me ask you. So at Crunchyroll, how many different maybe channels were you working with, and what type of skill sets did you have to kind of rely on to make these things work and have success in this era or area?
I mean, I would say for Crunchyroll, there's kind of a differentiation between uh, the product like using the channels, let's say like a owned and operated channel and just seeing it as a distribution channel versus kind of like the actual strategy, the messaging and positioning. Because I think with Crunchyroll, when you're marketing, let's say a licensed brand, right? It's really more of a distribution channel because
Hmm.
there's so many rules and licensor restrictions and stuff like that. It's like here's a piece of key art, cut it up, right, in a way that's licensor friendly, right? Like paste it on to or have that be distributed to a bunch of different marketing channels, life cycle, social, etc. So I would say in that sense, like when promoting the brand stuff, like or new IPs, like it was definitely much more plug and play. But I'd say like for on the games division, which was kind of a new division that I was working on, the main
Hmm.
thing that I was trying to bring was if I'm going to organize the artist, the social media team, life cycle, I'm trying to give them a holistic sense of like what are our goals for this title, whether it's like qualitative goals, so those would be like emotional like goals. What do we want users to feel? How do we want to message it, right? What's the tone and style that we should use? um, how can we make sure that our partners are really happy, right? So the development partners that we're working with to make the games, right? How do we achieve our business outcomes?
Hmm.
um, and then from there, like, things like mood boards, like what's the tone and
Oof.
style, like visually, but also like with examples. Those things like really, I think, can help other teams that don't directly report to me, but I can help influence like, here's the goal, here's the strategy, here's the positioning for this game or title that we're working on, and so that way when they're communicating or actually executing the work, they can kind of repeat and regurgitate some of that stuff. So if PR is saying like, hey, you mentioned XYZ, right? Like it's going to focus on, these specific features that you were highlighting as some of the key benefits of like this title. On the
Hmm.
emotional side, maybe social will put in different kinds of words, right? In the way that they describe, the title. So those are different things where like planning wise, like it's much more holistic from a product marketing perspective.
Dude, that's just insane. I'm still trying to digest all of this. So hats off to you for managing all these multiple different initiatives. So folks don't typically, and I'm going to share a little bit about my path. We don't get into recruiting through education or some sort of program. It seems to me that product marketing is similar. How did you get into product marketing? Because obviously you didn't study that in college. And when did you know, like, hey, this is kind of cool. This is kind of something I want to do? Because you did, span 10 years doing product marketing. So again, how did you get into it, and when did you know, like, wow, this is something that's feasible?
Yeah, so so like I mentioned before, like I always knew I wanted to get into marketing.
Mhm.
Marketing is so broad. There's like the quantitative side where it's like performance marketing, life cycle
Mhm.
marketing, etc. And then I think for
Got
product
it.
marketing, it was more like I would say probably more the qualitative side. Like how do I uh, get players, right, to really enjoy, a product or adopt a product or an experience like
Hmm.
holistically, both numbers, qualitatively and quantitatively. So when I was working at Disney, like I mentioned, I was a marketer, but like kind of stuck in on the product side of things. And so
Right.
one of the things that our studio head at the time knew I wanted to get in marketing, but there was, like I mentioned, there was no headcount on the marketing team. And so I was really fortunate enough to have a dotted line to someone in marketing, right?
Mm.
And they were kind of teaching me like how to put together a product marketing plan, like content calendar roadmap, etc. These are things that like
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily like I just didn't have the awareness of, right? And so just having someone who was more experienced kind of show me the ropes of like how to put a positioning statement together, how to put together a holistic marketing plan, and just being able to see it and be exposed to it made me realize like, okay, I think that's the path that I wanted to go down. Like I wanted to be able to help control and dictate what kinds of strategies across different channels that we can use to kind of have the best marketing outcome if we're launching a
Mm.
game or if there's any reactivations, etc. That's just something that really excited me. So I kind of got a taste there, and then going on to NetMarble, I had someone who had worked in the games industry for a while, really actually I would think solidify and teach me the ropes of like what's a general format of how to put together a product marketing plan. And
Mm.
so from there, it's just like each job I've learned and taken something away from uh, every boss that I've had, whether it's like a way of thinking, right? Or, hey, how do I evolve my templates, right? How do I evolve, like, are these templates that maybe were made when someone had an MBA and was doing product marketing? Maybe that evolves into someone who has worked at an ad agency and they use a specific type of template that's maybe more contemporary or up to date. And so I've kind of learned things along the way of like what's the best way to plan, right? Set, I think, set stakeholder expectations in terms of the plans, but also try to address future problems in these plans. So it all kind of just
Mm.
stacked up together in terms of like how do I make each of these plans better, depending on what kinds of things that stakeholders might be asking.
Dude, so cool, man. Again, I had no idea there was so much involved. And I feel like there's this whole infrastructure that needs to be streamlined for it to have success at the very tail end. So I guess to my first question, you just found a couple of mentors that people you're reporting into or dotted line to learn the craft. That's very cool. I think a lot of folks overlook that. I think networking internally at your own company where you're working at is definitely a huge benefit if you can meet the right people, have conversations, and maybe be genuinely interested in their role, and then build rapport. Because that's obviously led you to where you're at nowadays. So, Mike, we're coming up at the half hour mark. What's
Okay.
next for you, and what piece of advice would you like to share for folks looking for their next role?
I think my advice, look for people who are looking for their next role is, obviously everyone has different, financial situations of what they need to do. They're in a different season of life, right? Depending on
Hmm.
what they need. I just really hope that anyone that I think the most idealized form of work is to work at a place where you can really enjoy working with your coworkers, right?
Okay.
Finding joy in the work that you do. Just because like you spend so much time with your coworkers, right? And you basically spend 9 to 5, 5 days a week, right, with
Hmm.
them. Probably spend more time with them like than your family, to a certain degree. And so that's the most important thing is that if you can find something that brings joy in what you do, right? Like
Mm.
if you're able, right? Like even if you have to take if you can take the pay cut to find somewhere you can enjoy working with your
Yeah.
coworkers and feel like you're doing meaningful work, that's the most important thing. I think,
Very cool.
early on in our 20s, uh, you see so many people, especially like in the Bay Area, where it's just like, wow, people are moving up in their careers so fast. Like I know a lot of people just like, I just want to get to VP of whatever as soon as possible.
Right.
And you can do that, whether it's at you get it as go to a startup, right? And it takes off from a growth perspective, right? And then you become a VP, you have a bunch of teams under you, right? Like, and for the rest of your career, you can be like, I'm a VP at this growth startup, and I manage a team of 10 plus, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever, right? And that stays with you forever. And not everyone's going to have that opportunity, right? There's a little bit of skill and luck involved, in order to get that. But I think when you get to your 30s and 40s, like, uh, you have other priorities, I think, like usually at hand.
Yeah.
And I think as someone in my mid 30s right now, I realize like, you know, being a VP of something, right? Like that shouldn't be the end. For some people, it's the end all be all, right? Like that's what they're
Hmm.
aspiring to get. But I think like there's so many more opportunities now where you don't necessarily have to do it, but you could still have a really fulfilling life, without necessarily just saying like I need to be a senior director, VP of whatever.
Right.
So I think it's just really to make sure you take the time to smell the roses sometimes and enjoy the work that you
Hmm.
do. And there's more to life than just trying to climb up for titles and amassing teams and resources under you. That's something it's not necessarily for everyone.
Hmm.
But I think that's kind of how the mind shift changes a little bit. I think as we get older, just to have different priorities.
Yeah. That's beautiful, man. I don't think, I think that there's a gentleman on LinkedIn. His name is Maurice Philogene. There's a Try Life On podcast. He mentions the same thing as he was in his career, working at Accenture, climbing that ladder. He realized there was a certain point where that didn't matter anymore. And to your point here, yeah, I guess, different folks, different strokes, I guess they say.
Yeah.
And if the VP makes sense for you, go for it. If it doesn't, and you'd rather, work remotely and travel the world and, have your, your basic living expenses met, then so be it. I think we live in a world now where, all things are possible in those aspects. And there's not just one, very linear career ladder that you must reach in order to, define success for yourself. So, thanks for that, man. I guess perfect segue to, what's next for you. Is it a VP role? Totally kidding. Uh, but what do you got going on? What are you working on? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm actually about to take a trip to Japan, mid-March to mid-April for about 40 days.
Hmm.
Just trying to do some resetting while I'm over there.
Okay.
And then, I'm kind of tossing up between like, do I want to take the podcast stuff, more seriously
Hmm.
afterwards? Is that a full-time career path that I want to go down, right? Or,
Right.
like, do I want to, if I do jump back into, the workforce, right? I just don't want it to be necessarily the same kind of experience, right, that I've had
Hmm.
before. It's got to be something a little bit more meaningful, something that's like I don't really have that experience in my tool belt, and I'd like to
Yeah.
jump on to that experience. So I just know it just has to be something different, and that's kind of
Mm.
where I'm at in my headspace right now in my career. Um, like I don't have kids yet, right? So and also as I'm getting older, I'm thinking, hey, it's like you only have so much time, so much health, right? And, at least for me right now, like money's okay, right? So it's like take the time
Yeah.
off, right? Because not everybody gets that chance,
Right.
if we're able to.
Do love that. And if you are going to Japan, or you are going to Japan, I need to introduce you to Salim Galau, who's a friend of mine that I recorded a podcast with in December. And I was editing today, He's an anime publisher. So regardless of what happened, I think you guys should meet and maybe hang out for a bit because he's a solid guy as well and similar
Awesome.
mindsets, right? So I think that'd be kind of a cool partnership. But yeah, any last things, Mike, before we wrap up?
No last things on my end. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. It's different for me to be a podcast guest on the other
Yeah,
side when I'm not hosting.
totally.
Uh, so I'm excited. I'm excited for when this actually comes out.
Yeah, cool, man. I'll do my best to get it out as quickly as possible. But as you know, editing and all that stuff takes a bit of time. Before we officially hit the stop button, what's the setup? I see you have Audio Technicas. You know, what's the microphone? Is there like a DDA converter or A to D converter? Yeah, just tell me what's going on with your podcast setup so I can learn from you.
Yeah, so I have a external mic. This is like, ironically enough, my voice actor friend who does dubs for anime, this is the one that
Hmm.
she uses.
Oh,
So
cool.
I ended up buying it, and then I realized that it has like a very specific cable that needs to go into a mixer, right? So I was like, oh,
Oh,
I now I need to
mm,
actually buy a sound mixer. So I think it's like a
hmm,
Scarlett Focusrite that
okay.
I have that plugged in, and then for the audio jack, it's like a external audio jack, not like a USB one, but like one of the more like
Like a
audio
TRS
specific. Yeah,
XLR,
yeah, something like that. So that's kind of my setup right now. I used to use it for work too, but definitely
Mm,
this is for more of the podcast setup, and just want to make sure that I got clean audio as like a part of it, as part of like the podcast stuff. So that's kind of the reason why I put it all together, just because like I wanted to make
hmm.
sure that I had like good solid equipment to do some of the podcast recordings.
Yeah, yeah. I think I might switch to like wired. I'm standing up and I'm away from my desk, so it may not work, but I always want, obviously want the best quality audio as
Yeah,
well.
I
So,
think because like my podcasts tend to run like like a few hours long. Just
hmm.
having that, you just don't want it to cut out like accidentally, right? So I
Yeah.
think having the wired part is really helpful. Having the mic also, especially with like the
Hmm.
foam covers and stuff like that. Um just helps cut out any sort of ambient noise. You know, sometimes like there might be like a car like driving by on the street, and those are things that you kind of want to make sure that you can try to block out. Just makes for a better editing experience as well.
Very cool, man. Yes. We will keep in touch and talk more podcasts offline and editing and all stuff. But dude, thanks for your time. I learned a ton today. I didn't know that there was so many layers to your career path and experience. And every time we catch up, it's always fun and it's always a good learning experience for me. So thanks again for your time, Mike, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.